Dust kicked up under the truck tires as I rolled into Blackridge, the wind slapping through the open window with the sharp tang of pine sap and diesel exhaust. This logging town huddled in the shadow of the Cascades, miles from anywhere that mattered. Through the haze, I spotted her silhouette in the mill office window. Jessa Harlan, the foreman I'd been sent to unseat. Her posture was rigid, arms likely crossed, already assessing the newcomer like a felled log for flaws. I'd driven straight through from Seattle, body tense from the hours behind the wheel, muscles knotted against the uncertainty. Hired by the company to shadow her, challenge her grip on operations, prove I could run the cup better. One wrong move, and the crew would close ranks. Her gaze met mine as I parked, dark eyes weighing my competence against the threat I carried. No smile, just that steady measure. Dawn broke cold the next morning. First shift at the cut site waited, chainsaws already warming in the chill. The town sprawled like a scar across the valley floor. Sawmill humming constant at its heart, blades whining through timber stacked high against the sky. Mud-churned roads webbed out to bunkhouses and supply sheds, the air thick with resin and the faint rot of fresh stumps. Isolation wrapped it tight. No mainland gossip seeped in here, just the echo of axes and the weight of what folks kept to themselves. Blackridge bred silence, the kind that settled in your bones after a long day. I'd fled the city 2 weeks back, chasing steady work after a string of dead-end gigs in construction offices. Bills piled like cordwood, and the promise of a supervisor role in logging pulled me north. But the company brass had twisted it. Shadow Jessa for a month, compete for her spot. Prove my cuts were cleaner, my bids sharper, or watch her hold the reins. Escape the urban grind for this? My hands still itched from desk jobs, not the rough bark of Douglas fir. First meeting hit in the office that afternoon. A cramped space off the mill floor, reeking of coffee grounds and oiled paper. Jessa stood behind her desk, arms crossed over a flannel shirt rolled to her elbows, forearms corded from years hauling lines. "You're the one from corporate," she said, voice clipped like a radio dispatch, not a question. Her eyes, sharp under a fringe of dark hair, measured every inch of me. Boots caked from the drive, notebook clutched too tight. No handshake, just instructions barked out. Safety protocols, crew rotations, the site's unforgiving rhythm. She spoke in short bursts, each word placed deliberate, like staking a claim line. We shared the workspace from day one, desks shoved side by side under a single bulb that buzzed faint. Hers was orderly, logs bound neat in leather covers, pencils aligned like rifle rounds. Mine? Rough sketches scratched on napkins, city habits dying hard amid the clutter of maps and calipers. Tension hummed between us, her chair scraping whenever she leaned to check my figures, a silent override. I'd plot a timber line, she'd glance over, shake her head once, and reroute it with a pencil stroke. No explanation, just the authority she'd earned over 5 seasons. Crew calling her by name while they eyed me like fresh bait. Subtle blocks piled up quick. The men, burly sorts with calluses thicker than hide, nodded to her orders but dragged feet on mine. Tools handed slow, questions met with grunts. Her word was law. Mine, a whisper against the wind. Trust didn't come easy in a town this small, where winters locked you in with the same faces and outsiders carried the scent of change. I pushed through, mapping slopes she'd overlooked, but the barriers held firm, her presence a wall of quiet command. Body ached already from the unfamiliar labor, shoulders throbbing as I lugged sample cores back to the truck, bark shards digging into palms. Sweat soaked through my layers, mixing with the earth-stamped chill. But my mind kept drifting to her movements. Contained, efficient. The way she swung a clipboard like an extension of her arm, no wasted motion. It was the kind of focus born from solitude, from staring down ridges that didn't yield. I caught myself watching too long, the reserve in her mirroring the walls I'd built back in the city. Desires tucked away like tools in a shed. Evening meal forced us close that first night. Communal table in the bunkhouse, laden with stew and cornbread, steam rising thick. Crew shoveled food in silence, forks clinking against plates, but silences between Jessa and me thickened like fog rolling down the valley. She sat across, eyes on her bowl, and I felt the pull of unspoken lines, the rivalry sharpening in the dim light. Days settled into a rhythm carved by the mountain's pulse, I woke before light to the distant echo of chainsaws starting up, their growl pulling me from the thin bunk mattress. The air hung cold in the bunkhouse, frost etching the window panes like veins on old bark. Coffee brewed black and strong on the communal stove, steam curling sharp as I poured 2 mugs. One for me, one slid across the scarred table to Jessa without a word. She nodded once, fingers brushing mine brief on the handle, but the silence stretched tense, broken only by the scrape of tin cups and the crew's low mutters shuffling in. Mornings meant assigning the crew to timber lines, maps spread wide under the office bulb. I'd trace slopes with a stubbed pencil, marking falls that shaved time off hauls, but Jessa overrode them every time. "That ridge drops too steep after rain," she'd say, voice flat, redrawing the path in her neat script. Her decision stuck, crew nodding to her while mine hung unheeded, like felled limbs left to rot. I bit back arguments, the competition grinding slow, each override a notch deeper into the rivalry. Out at the cut site, labor bit hard. Axe swung heavy into the wood, blade biting deep with a thud that jarred up my arms, chips flying sharp against my cheek. Sweat beaded quick, mixing with sawdust that clung gritty to my skin, turning shirt to paste under the load. Shoulders burned as I hauled logs, bark rough under gloved hands, the weight pulling at joints still soft from city days. Muscles screamed by noon, but I swung harder, each strike a push to match her pace, prove the outsider could fell as clean. She watched from the ridge sometimes, silhouette sharp against the sky, arms folded as she assessed the cuts. No words carried down, just that steady gaze tracking my lines, measuring if they held or splintered. The unspoken rivalry hung there, her position unchallenged, mine a scramble for ground. I pushed through the ache, felling wider stands to show my read on the grain, but her shadow loomed, the crew's loyalty a barrier thicker than underbrush. Town life whispered its limits in the off hours. Bar gatherings drew sparse crowds, women paired off in corners with men from the mill, laughter tight around church suppers and family claims. The circle stayed small, outsiders like me drawing stares that lingered too long, whispers trailing like smoke from the stack. Church bells tolled Sundays, pulling folks in tight, judgments unspoken but heavy on those who didn't fit the lines. Solitude pressed in, nights alone in the bunk with the wind rattling shutters, desires buried under layers of flannel and fatigue. Her reserve echoed my own, a mirror in the quiet hours. I'd catch her at the table after shifts, eyes distant over cooling coffee, the air between us heavy with what stayed unvoiced. That pull simmered low, hidden like roots under frozen soil, her contained glances stirring something deep, a want that mirrored the isolation we both carried. Body tensed, not just from the work, but from the weight of it, the unspoken draw thickening the spaces we shared. Then the loader jammed one afternoon, tires spinning useless in the mud as rain slicked the ground, urgency building with the gathering dusk. We had no choice but to work it free, together, reliance pulling us close for the first time. Rain fell steady as we reached the loader, fat drops turning the earth to slurry under our boots. The machine sat mired, front tires sunk deep in the rut, engine growling futile against the pole. Dusk gathered thick in the pines, shadows lengthening like fingers across the cut site. Crew had scattered to the trucks, leaving us alone with the downpour and the weight of the haul wading upstream. Jessa moved first, grabbing the winch line from the bed of her rig, her flannel darkening with wet. I followed, heart thudding from the sprint, mud sucking at my heels. We worked the levers together, her hands strong on the controls, mine feeding slack on the cable. The rain slicked everything, metal cold and slippery, grips turning treacherous. As she shifted the boom, our fingers overlapped on the lever, rough calluses meeting in the chill. Her breath came close, warm against my ear over the hiss of water, guiding the angle. The touch lingered accidental, a beat too long before we pulled apart. But the heat of it stayed, unrelated to the effort. I felt it coil low, like a logging cable pulled taut, ready to snap under strain. "Ease it left, there's a root snag under there," she said, voice steady but edged with the day's fatigue, a strain threading through like frayed hemp. She knew the sight blind, pointing out pitfalls I'd missed in my maps. Hidden washes that swallowed tires after storms, boulders masked by ferns. Her knowledge spilled in clipped bursts, body leaning in to show the line, shoulder brushing mine. No choice but to trust it, the reliance forcing us shoulder to shoulder in the narrowing cab, rain drumming the roof like impatient fists. Heat rose in my chest then, not from the wrestle with mud, but from the nearness. The air thickened inside the loader, her scent cutting through. Pine resin and damp earth mixed with something warmer. Human. My pulse matched the engine's rumble, tension humming like that cable, every shift of her arm pulling tighter. Body aware of hers in ways the work demanded ignore. The flex of her forearm as she cranked, the way rain traced her jaw. Desires flickered unbidden, buried under the rivalry, but surfacing now in the press of necessity. Crew watched from the ridge, their sidelong glances cutting sharp through the sheets of rain. Big men in oilskins, arms folded, eyes flicking between us like we were exhibits in some unspoken show. Women didn't run loaders side by side out here, not without comment. Their stares amplified the isolation, the field's rough edges closing in, making our partnership feel exposed, fragile. No help offered, just that quiet judgment, the kind that whispered in bunkhouse corners about outsiders and lines crossed. It pressed us closer, the world narrowing to the mud and her steady voice. We rocked the machine free at last, tires catching purchase with a groan, mud sluicing off in rivulets. Engine steadied, the haul line taut again. We climbed down, breaths heaving in the cooling dusk, rain easing to a mist. Jessa wiped mud from her hands on her jeans. No words, just a shared exhale that hung between us, visible in the chill. Vulnerability flickered there, brief as a struck match. Her shoulders dropping, eyes meeting mine without the usual measure. For a second, the foreman cracked, revealing the woman beneath, tired and unguarded. Back at the office that night, shift planning stretched late under the lantern's glow. Maps unrolled across the desk, her pencil tracing night runs. But talk veered personal, boundaries blurring like ink in damp. Town life closed in like the valley walls after dark. Bar gatherings pulled a handful of souls on Fridays, the dim space thick with cigarette haze and the low rumble of men nursing beers. Women clustered in pairs, arms linked, traditional, around husbands from the mill or kin ties that ran deep as roots. Laughter stayed contained, eyes flicking to strangers, like me, the outsider, nursing a soda at the end of the scarred counter. Solitude hit acute then, the empty stool beside me a weight heavier than any log. No easy conversations, no glances that lingered without judgment. Nights ended walking back alone, boots crunching gravel under stars that felt too close, too indifferent. I'd catch hints of Jessa's past in the fragments folks let slip. Overheard at the pump one morning, a grizzled loader operator muttering about her losses, sister gone to the city years back, taking the family claim with her, leaving Jessa to hold the line alone. Another time, the cook in the bunkhouse shook her head over stew, saying Jessa had buried more than timber in these hills. No details, just the quiet pity that hung like mist. Late nights, I'd see her pacing the office under lantern light, silhouette sharp through the window, hands clasped behind her back as if wrestling shadows. The glow spilled yellow on the porch, her steps measured, deliberate, like she was mapping grief no one else could see. Hazard shared the work closer those weeks. One afternoon, a widowmaker branch gave way unexpectedly from a leaning fir, cracking down through the canopy like thunder's warning. I was marking the base, axe idle in my hand, when it plummeted, needles whipping air. Instinct pulled me back, but the limb grazed close, bark shattering on the stump beside me. Heart slammed hard, knees buckling into the duff. Jessa was there in a breath, her hand steadying my arm, grip firm like ridge rock under boot. "Breathe," she said, voice low, eyes scanning for more threats. The touch grounded me, warm through flannel, chasing the shake from my limbs. No fuss, just that hold until the world steadied. Her presence a quiet bulwark against the wild. Desire surfaced in the quiet hours after, when the mill fell silent and wind sighed through the pines. Lying on the bunk, sheets rough against skin, I'd trace the day's echoes. The curve of her wrist as she pointed slopes, the way her laugh broke rare over a clean cut. It felt like undercurrents in mountain streams, hidden flows pulling steady beneath the surface rush, carving paths through stone over time. Body tensed with it, a low ache unrelated to muscle burn, wants stirring like silt disturbed. I'd wonder at her pacing, if she carried the same hidden pull, isolation amplifying the unspoken, turning solitude into something alive, insistent. Rivalry shifted slow under that pressure. Bids for the next contract came due, maps unrolled late in the office, arguments fading to nods. I'd sketch a haul route tighter through the draws, and she'd lean in, pencil hovering, then mark approval with a quiet, "That works." Competitive edges softened, her overrides turning collaborative, ideas weaving like branches in a stand. Crew noticed, grunts giving way to questions aimed at both of us, the divide blurring in the shared rhythm. No grand yielding, just the evolution. Her authority stretching to include rather than exclude. Subtle gestures built the bridge. Mornings, she'd pass the thermos of tea across the truck console, steam rising sharp in the cab, her fingers brushing mine longer than needed. Eyes met over the rim, holding a beat, dark and searching, the air thickening with promise unspoken. Afternoons brought her handing tools without ask. A rag tossed my way after mud, the cloth warm from her pocket. Small things, but they stacked like cordwood, warming the spaces between shifts, desires threading through the routine like veins in wood. Supply run delayed that Thursday. The truck bogged in a washout from early rains, stranding us at the ridge camp as storm clouds brewed heavy overhead. Winds picked up, forcing us to hunker overnight. Closeness inevitable in the tight trailer. Winds rose sharp that evening, whipping through the pines like a blade through underbrush, branches snapping overhead with cracks that echoed off the ridge. The trailer rocked on its axles, metal groaning against the gusts, while back at the mill, I imagined the shutters rattling loose, banging against the walls like loose rigging on a stalled rig. Shortwave crackled warnings from town. Evacuate the low sites, stormfront barreling in fast. But we ignored them, hunkered in the tight space with no way down the washout. Jessa fiddled with the dial, static hissing, then snapped it off. "Won't change the haul," she said, voice low over the rising howl. The air outside thickened, clouds boiling dark, lightning flickering distant like a struck match in the gloom. Prep work pulled us out anyway, adrenaline sharpening every sense as we dashed to secure the gear. Rain started in sheets, cold and relentless, soaking through our jackets before we reached the shed. Inside, the space narrowed to a clutter of chains and tarps, bodies brushing close in the dim lantern light. Her shoulder grazed mine as she hauled a canvas over the winch drum, the contact electric in the confined press. I knotted lines on the loader, fingers numb from the chill, but aware of her nearness. The flex of her arms, breath coming quick against the wind's whine through cracks in the door. Adrenaline thrummed low, not just from the storm, but from the unavoidable touch, her hip bumping my side when she reached for a steak. No room to step back, senses alive to the warmth cutting through damp layers, the scent of wet wool and pine clinging to her. Lightning cracked close then, splitting the sky with a boom that shook the shed walls, thunder rolling heavy down the slope. Power flickered out, lantern sputtering to a hiss before dying, leaving us in the flashlight's narrow beam. Jessa's hand steadied on the workbench, her voice hitching as she exhaled sharp. "This could take the whole operation," she said, words catching like bark under a dull blade. One bad slide and the cut site's gone. Years of bids, the crew's trust. Corporate's already circling. Fear edged her tone, raw in the dark, the foreman's reserve cracking under the storm's weight. She gripped the edge harder, knuckles paling, the vulnerability spilling like runoff after thaw. I stepped closer, the beam shaking in my hand, casting her face in stark shadows. "I get it," I replied, throat tight against the next rumble. "Fled the city for this. Judgments there sharper than any axe, eyes on every step that didn't fit. Hid long enough." My hand found hers brief, clasping over the wood, palms pressing warm against the thunder's shudder. The touch held a second, grounding us both, her fingers curling slight before pulling back. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the lines etched deep around her eyes, the weight she carried alone out here. She turned the bean low, sitting on a crate, the air heavy with rain's metallic tang. "Town's got its own chains," she admitted, voice threading soft over the patter on the tin roof. "Women like us, circles small, paired off traditional or whispered about at church. No room for more without the stairs piling like slash. Lost someone once to that pressure, the isolation twisting everything." Her eyes met the light raw, unguarded, reflecting the constraints that bound tighter than any contract. No names, just the truth of it. The limited pool closing in like fog on the valley. Desires stifled under layers of duty and silence. We sat through the worst. Backs against the wall, knees nearly touching in the cramped space. Thunder faded to growls, rain easing to a steady drum. Silence settled then, like fresh snow blanketing the ridge, muffling the world's rough edges. Desires hung acknowledged without words, the pull between us clear now, a quiet current mirroring the storm's release. Her shoulder leaned against mine, warmth bridging the gap. No need to voice what the night had stripped bare. Dawn broke gray, the calm revealing twisted branches and scarred earth, damage pulling us toward the site's deeper secrets, her hand lingering on my arm as we stepped out. Dawn's gray light filtered through the pines, casting long shadows over the twisted branches littering the slope. Mudslides had carved fresh scars down the ridge. Earth churned raw like a fresh stump, rocks tumbled into the wash. We loaded the trailer quick, chains rattling as I secured the damaged gear, bent winch hooks and splintered stakes, while Jessa hitched the truck, her movement steady despite the night's toll. Her hand lingered on my arm a second longer when she passed the thermos, steam curling in the chill, eyes meeting mine with that new, quiet weight. "Follow close," she said, voice low over the engine's rumble. "There's a path up the unmarked ridge, shortcut to assess the upper cut." No explanation, just the lead of her truck pulling ahead, tires gripping the slick grade as we trailered through the debris, mud flinging up in arcs behind us. The road narrowed to a rutted track, pines crowding close, branches scraping the cab like insistent fingers. She veered off at a split no map showed, engine growling over roots that bucked the frame. My truck followed, the trailer swaying heavy, heart thudding with the uncertainty of hidden ground. We parked at a pullout where the ridge broke sharp, earth dropping away to the valley below, mist still clinging in pockets. Jessa cut the engine first, stepping out into the damp, boots sinking slight in the needle duff. She reached into the glove box, pulling a folded map yellowed at the edges, lines faded but deliberate. Hand-drawn routes snaking to spots the company charts ignored. Her fingers traced one path, callous tips pressing the paper, marking a loop around a hidden draw. "This leads to the cabin," she said, voice threading soft, eyes on the folds rather than me. "Old spot, off the grid. We checked the slide damage there first. No crew trails this way." The map felt like a key turned slow, her hand steady as she handed it over, our fingers brushing in the transfer, warmth cutting the morning's bite. We hiked the narrow trail she pointed out, boots crunching over layers of needles soft as old moss, the air sharp with wet bark and distant rain. The path twisted upward, roots stepping like uneven stairs, ferns brushing our legs in the understory gloom. Jessa led, pace measured, her flannel sleeve catching on a low branch that she snapped free without pause. Stories came in fragments as we climbed, her voice blending with the wind's sigh through the canopy. "Built this trail as a kid," she said, breath even despite the grade. "Dad showed me the lines, refuge when the mill fights got loud, town eyes too close. Up here, the world dropped away, just the ridge and the quiet." Her words painted flashes. Summers hauling water from a spring, winters snowed in with a lantern and ledgers. The cabin, a knot in the timber she'd claimed against the chaos below. I listened, steps sinking to hers, the labor of the climb pulling sweat despite the chill, body aware of the space between us shrinking with each switchback. The cabin emerged at trail's end, tucked in a cleft of rock and fir, walls weathered gray like driftwood, roof sagging under moss. No sign, no path but the one we'd taken, her secret etched into the land. She pushed the door open with a creak, hinges groaning like old joints, inviting me inside without a word, just a tilt of her head. The space wrapped intimate, air still and thick with the scent of aged wood and damp quilts folded on a narrow bunk. Shelves lined one wall, jars of preserves dusty, a table scarred from years of knives and plans. Unspoken histories hung in the corners, faded photos pinned crooked, a journal spine cracked open to blank pages now. She lit the stove with a match, flames licking kindling slow, the warmth spreading tentative against the stone walls. We sat by the fire as it caught, knees touching on the rough-hewn bench, the heat bridging the emotional chasms the storm had cracked. Jessa stared into the flames, shoulders dropping, the foreman's lines softening in the glow. "Isolation here's a blade," she said, voice hitching low. Heartbreaks pile like slash after a clear cut. First love fled to the city, whispers chasing her out. Then the family claim splintering when Sis left. Held it all back, tears dammed like creeks behind beaver runs, or they'd flood everything. Her eyes glistened, not spilling but close, hand resting near mine on the wood, the vulnerability raw as exposed root. I nodded, the pull tightening, desires coiling like smoke up the chimney, our thighs pressing steady in the shared warmth. Return to town that afternoon stirred the first whispers, crew eyes lingering at the mill, testing the bond we'd forged against the valley's unyielding pressures. We rolled back into Blackridge as the sun dipped low, trucks rumbling over the rutted main drag, mud still caked on the fenders from the ridge. Crew milled outside the mill, axes propped against stacks, their murmurs cutting sharp when we parked. Heads turned slow, eyes flicking between Jessa and me, the kind of sidelong glances that carried weight without words. "Where'd you two hole up?" one loader grunted, wiping grease from his hands, the question hanging like smoke. Jessa shut the door with a thud, no pause. "Storm damage up top. Handled it." Her tone flat, but the crew shifted, boots scraping gravel, whispers threading low about the unmarked path, the hours unaccounted. No outright challenge, just the undercurrent, testing the shift they'd sensed. Next morning, at the general store, it thickened. I grabbed nails and twine from the bins, the wooden floor creaking underfoot, air heavy with the scent of dried beans and lantern oil. Women clustered by the counter, wives from the mill families, aprons dusted with flour, their sidelong looks sharper than hooks. One leaned in to the clerk, voice pitched just loud enough. "Out all night, them two. Company's shaking things up." Eyes met mine brief, then away. The isolation of the store amplifying it, shelves closing in like valley walls. I paid quick, bag rustling, heart thudding steady against the judgment. Jessa waited outside, truck idling, her nod pulling me back to the cab without a word. Meetings tested her steel. That afternoon in the office, crew packed the space, chairs scraping as bids for the next contract loomed. Doubt spilled early, a hauler questioning the ridge run, eyes on me like I was the weak link. Outsider calls? We lose ground. Jessa stood firm at the head, arms crossed over the table's edge, voice cutting clean through the haze. We assessed it together. Path holds, saves 2 days on haul. No yield. Her gaze sweeping the room, landing on me at her side without flicker. I nodded, adding the slope grades, our words sinking like felled limbs dropping even. The murmurs died slow, her defense a bulwark, pulling me into the line she'd drawn. Crew filed out quieter, the bond visible now, a quiet claim against the pushback. Inside, resolve weighed heavy that night, bunk creaking as I lay staring at the rafters. Flight tugged. Pack the truck, head south before whispers turned to walls, desires crushed under the town's boot. But fight rooted deeper, like old-growth timber sunk into granite, unyielding against storms. Jessa's map burned in my mind, the cabin's warmth, her hand tracing lines that mirrored the pull in my chest. Leaving meant severing that, isolation swallowing us both again. No. I'd stand. Desires tangled firm in the soil we'd shared, the rivalry forged into something stronger, worth the grind. Joint decisions sealed it days later. Bids unrolled across the desk, lanterns casting long shadows, numbers crunching tight for the company review. We plotted as a team now, her pencil marking my roots, my figures sharpening hers. Negotiations dragged tense, phone crackling with brass questions from afar, doubts probing like dull blades. Under the table, her hand found mine, squeezing once, fingers lacing brief through the dark. Warmth spread steady, grounding the strain, her thumb pressing my knuckle like a silent vow. No words, just the hold, affirming the shift amid the corporate grind. Confrontation hit at the bar that Friday. Older woman, mill widow with eyes like chipped flint, cornering us over sodas. "Town small for games," she said, voice probing sharp, gaze flicking between us. "Women pairing odd? Church talks." The limited pool laid bare, her questions digging at the edges of what we'd built. Jessa met it straight. "Our business holds the cut." But our glance shared then, eyes locking brief, affirmed the choice, no retreat, the connection hours against the stairs. Evening walks strengthened it, up to the overlook, where pines thinned to sky. We'd climb slow after shifts, boots crunching duff, her shoulder brushing mine in the fading light. Fingers linked at the ridge edge, palms rough and sure, the valley sprawling below like a map we'd redrawn. Air cooled sharp, but the touch warmed deep, desires threading steady. Contract deadline loomed Monday, forcing the ultimate commitment. Our bond, the line we'd hold or break. Monday dawned clear, the valley air crisp with the bite of early frost, pines standing sharp against a sky washed pale. The office filled tight by noon, crew crammed shoulder to shoulder, the phone line humming as corporate brass weighed our bid. Jessa stood at the desk's edge, fingers drumming the wood once, her flannel sleeve brushing mine where I leaned close. The voice crackled through, numbers aligned, cuts efficient, the contract ours. Cheers rose muted, fists thumping tables more than voices lifting, relief washing through the room like a stream after rain, cool and steady against the day's heat. Jessa turned, her embrace quick but solid, arms wrapping firm around my shoulders, the press of her body grounding in the shuffle of boots. No lingering, just that hold, her breath warm against my neck, the scent of sawdust and pine clinging to her. Crew clapped backs, but their eyes held a new measure, the shift settling quiet. Afternoons blurred into planning after that. Maps unrolled wider across the scarred table. Expansions sketched in pencil strokes that wove our lines together. We'd plot new halls through untouched draws, her finger tracing slopes I'd scouted, my notes filling the margins of her logs. "Push the ridgeline here," she'd say, voice low over the lantern's glow, and I'd nod, adding the grade drops, the rhythm sinking like axes in tandem. Town eased slow into it, bar talk turning from probes to nods, the general store clerk sliding coffee without the sidelong flick. Women at church suppers still whispered edges, but the crew pulled us in, assigning joint runs without the drag. Acceptance didn't roar. It crept like roots through soil, the valley's weight lifting inch by inch. Evenings brought the emotional close, her palm flat on the table under lantern light, secrets shared, open now. I'd trace the map's faded lines across her skin with my fingertip, calluses rough against the softer ridges of her hand, following the paths to the cabin like veins under earth. No hiding. The roots we'd drawn spilled free, her stories of childhood refuges blending with mine of city flights, vulnerabilities laid bare like stumps after a clean cut. Her eyes held mine steady, dark and unflinching, the pull between us no longer coiled but flowing, desires acknowledged in the quiet stroke of thumb over knuckle. Challenges lingered in the shadows, whispers threading bar corners like smoke from the stack, church eyes weighing our walks too close. Isolation's weight pressed still, winters coming to lock the roads, judgments piling like snow on the ridge. But our bond ran deeper, roots sunk past the frost line, enduring the crush. No easy fade, we'd face the stairs, the limited pulls of town life, hands linked against the grind. That night drew us back to the secret place, truck bumping the unmarked trail under stars pricking the dark. The cabin waited, door creaking open to the familiar hush, fire kindling slow in the stove's belly. We moved without rush, her hands peeling layers from my shoulders, flannel dropping to the floorboards with a soft thud. Bodies entwined slow on the quilts, skin warm against skin, her thigh pressing mine in the fire's flicker. Vulnerabilities yielded full, her breath hitching as I traced her collarbone, my own guard crumbling under the weight of her touch, hips shifting deliberate in the narrow bunk. No frenzy, just the yield, muscles taut then easing, the air thick with sweat and the faint char of embers. Her fingers dug into my back, grounding the release, a low murmur escaping as we crested together, the ridge outside silent witness. Love's pull settled steady after, like gravity in the hills, drawing us down unyielding against the odds. We'd lie tangled, her head on my chest, heartbeat thudding even through the wood walls, the endurance carved deep as any logging scar. Hands linked on the ridge at dawn, valley stretching endless below, pines marching to the haze. Quiet truth of connection, found in hidden spaces. If this poll resonates, share your story below, subscribe for more.